Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jess Haberman, Director of Learning Solutions at Anaconda, and I'll be moderating today's panel on the evolution of data practitioner roles, building skills for success. This conversation will cover how data roles have evolved over the last few years, the overlap of data science and data engineering, and the differences in data science in academia versus private sector, and suggest career strategies for aspiring data practitioners, or as much of that as we can get through today. I'm pleased to introduce Joe Reese and Matt Housley, CEO and CTO of Ternary Data. I know Joe and Matt from when I was an acquisitions editor for their best-selling book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering, published by O'Reilly Media. We'll be recording this webinar and the link will be provided to you via email tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Feel free to post questions in the group chat and we'll do our best to answer them there. And if you participate in the chat, you'll be entered to win one of 3 free copies of the book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering. So thanks to our friends at O'Reilly for offering those free copies. That was a pretty brief intro. What have I missed? Is there anything else you'd like our audience to know about you if they don't know you already?
That's a good question.
Good on that. Yeah,
I think the questions will help to map out our bios a bit more, especially the topic of practitioners and data engineering and data science, which we have a lot of opinions about.
Indeed.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, I'll jump right in. I have a saucy question to start. So let's start by talking about your elected personas as recovering data scientists. So what precisely are you recovering from? Let's start with Joe on this one.
Well, I mean, I had a problem with data, and I was hooked on it for a while, and just kidding. So, recovering data scientists. I love Matt's take on this too, but I think we have very similar experiences. My experience, I don't think it's unique to data scientists. Data scientists are often hired to do, do data sciencey things, and they end up at their job and they realize that it's actually really difficult because there's sometimes no data upon which to do science, if you want to call it that. Typically, data scientists spend their time, searching around for data, maybe not having the right foundations in place, right infrastructure to get the data. Maybe the data is kind of not exactly at the highest quality and so forth. So I think that was a lot of the recognition that I think the aspiration of being data scientist is maybe a bit different from the reality of being a data scientist. I don't know, Matt, why are you a recovering data scientist?
Yeah, so I'll point out here, Joe came up with this a few years before we met, as I recall, Joe, right? You started using this term.
Well, I used to, so my friends called me a reformed data scientist, but I thought recovering was a bit more cheeky. So here we are.
Yeah.
And now there's a bunch of us.
Yeah, we're all over the place. And I think the reality is that this often happens in really hot careers. So for example, you could be a recovering front-end developer because you jumped into front-end because it was the cool thing. And then suddenly you discovered your app couldn't run without a back-end. And data science versus data engineering is a very similar situation. A couple of years ago, DJ Patel coined the term data science. Everyone wanted to be a data scientist, but data science can't really happen in production environments in a business without data engineering to back it up. And that was the experience that both Joe and I had. I got hired out of academia. I was teaching math at the time in the university and jumped into data science. And then I was able to solve some data engineering problems to support my own work and that of my teammates. And then pretty soon I was like, whoa, this is kind of cool, especially with all the changes happening in cloud. And that's kind of how I wandered into it. And so I didn't use the same term initially, but when I met Joe, I'm like, oh yeah, that's very much my experience, recovering, reformed, whatever. I started in data science and then wandered into this other really interesting field from there.
Well, and back then too, it was interesting because I think that there was, data science was the sexiest job of the 21st century. And a lot of companies wanted to hire data scientists, especially PhDs, with absolutely no industry experience whatsoever. But because you had a PhD, you would obviously make a great data scientist, whatever that is. So,
well, that's a great kind of segue into, what are the differences between sort of academia doing data science in that setting versus like when you move into industry, and sort of what are I'm curious about. I noticed some of the challenges. I'm curious like where you guys feel like that there's the most disconnect between those two kind of sectors.
So I would say the commonality is that in academia, in math, you learn a lot about problem solving, right? That's kind of your job, whether you're coming from the pure math side, so like solving some very classical mathematical problems, or the more statistical applied math side. Your goal is to solve problems and publish papers about it. The difference with business is they care a lot less about publications and attention, and they care about business results instead. And so you need to learn to shift those skills that you had into actually delivering systems and products and keeping them running, rather than a one-off, I'm going to publish a paper about some mathematical technique or about a biological analysis, for example, and then move on to the next thing. I don't know. What's your take on this, Joe? You didn't come from quite the same world, but I think you've observed a lot over your time in the career. You are from math at some point, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we both have math degrees. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the PhD, and I'm the one who never went to grad school. But yeah, I guess I've always had more of an applied focus, right? So applied math is kind of where I was. I think you were more in the theoretical end of things, and
Correct.
I think we're quite opposite in a lot of ways, actually, I would say. But I think as far as I can tell, again, I've known nothing except working in industry. So I guess I do teach once in a while at a university, so there's that. But I would say I'm like almost the anti-academic archetype, So I think there's a few differences I noticed. Like speed is definitely one of them. I think the academic path is just, there's a lot more I would say maybe thoughtfulness and the ability to think through hard problems. I don't think in industry you get that much leeway. I mean, results are sort of expected as quickly as you can get them. So some companies do have research arms, and I think that definitely promotes maybe deeper thinking and progress on problems that are notoriously difficult to solve. But that's one of the big differences I see is in industry. It's just the expectation is you move fast. Time is money, and that's that. So again, that's an attitude that I bring to things, and so I think especially working with Matt, I think it's a good balance, because he helps me be a bit more reflective on things than I otherwise would be. So
Sure. Yeah. So and you do still do some, or have recently done some teaching in the university setting, and then also some kind of virtual settings. I think you've been developing training courses and stuff, and especially kind of we all did, right, during the pandemic. So I'm curious, sort of like what skill, like are your teaching strategies different? Like, I'm curious a little bit about like that change, and sort of how you've evolved your teaching styles, like in maybe more of a virtual world, or even just kind of like post-pandemic, how things have changed in terms of teaching data science and data engineering topics.
I mean, I think
he's been teaching longer.
So. Yeah, I'll address two things. I'll address the shift from like more academic, so teaching math, to, in our case, we've taught courses on SQL and data engineering, basically, and then also the kind of virtual aspect of it. So in terms of moving from teaching math to teaching things like SQL, my focus went very much from, here's a set of standard curriculum material that you're supposed to teach these students. It's just kind of the rite of passage that they have to go through as part of their general education or as part of a math degree, versus teaching them, this is how you use a database to actually do the job of an analyst or a data engineer. This is how you run queries. This is how you test them. This is how you design queries. And the reason we even got involved is that Joe had to open his big mouth with one of our friends at the University of Utah, who was asking, well, what are students missing when you see them come out of the university? That was a lot of it. It's like they didn't have these practical skills. They could have a computer science degree and maybe they'd seen SQL before, but if you asked them to write a practical query to answer a question, they just couldn't do it. And so that was the focus of that class. And again, that was a big shift for me, because my teaching was things often like just generals like trigonometry, for instance, and then linear algebra, all useful stuff, but in a very abstract setting. In terms of moving more to a virtual format, I think we're still figuring that out in some respects, but I think the goal here is to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of the medium. And I feel like if you just go and do the thing you were doing before, just deliver a lecture, it's probably not going to be very engaging to the students. And so you have to figure out how to combine that lecture with online activities that will really allow them to engage with the material and develop some practical skills to use it. I don't know. What's your take on that, Joe?
I mean, definitely, I think it reminds me of that Marshall McLuhan quote, "The medium is the message," right? So online is just different than in person. I mean, I never taught long classes. I think I started teaching during COVID, so it was all virtual. I think when I was offered the chance to go do a 4-hour lecture every week, I definitely like, ran away in the other direction as quickly as I could, and handed it off to somebody I think who would probably be more capable of that. I don't know, it would be hard for me to understand what I would be talking about for 4 hours straight in a classroom setting, especially when we're talking about technical material. I think teaching math, where it's a lot, the curriculum's been around forever, right? It's like, teaching algebra is algebra. This is not a new subject, but I think with things like data and technology, right? I mean, especially my approach, which is, and again, you mentioned I open my big mouth, and which I tend to do that once in a while, and sometimes make some enemies, sometimes open up new opportunities for us, and
Sometimes
in
both.
this case, yeah, that also happens. In this case with the classes that we do, I would say we're trying to keep things current, right? I think that I'm trying to empathize with, if a student's going to pay a lot of money for a class, I think that they should be getting, skills and education that's going to be directly transferable when they hit the job market. Learning antiquated stuff, especially in the field of technology and data, I don't think that serves a purpose except to the school that's making all the money off of them. But I think that's a horrible disservice to the students. So when you ask me if I want to teach a 4-hour class, I'm like, well, again, the context is going to change because technology and the needs in the marketplace change so quickly. And so you're going to constantly have to keep those materials up to date, right? Whereas with online, I think it's just there's a lot more flexibility in that, perhaps. So obviously you want to balance, the fundamentals of things aren't going to change as quickly, right? But the reality is we operate at warp speed in tech, and that's just how it is. And so you have to also balance that against just what is the market demanding right now from new grads. So that's the approach I always took. Again, it's from a place of empathy, I think, with the people who are the students who are spending a lot of money, sometimes going into debt for this stuff. And I at least want to provide them with something valuable.
Yeah, I think that's true too of folks who are, taking online learning, spending thousands of dollars on boot camps and things like that. What would you say are the most valuable skills, valuable practical skills, and maybe, whether you're going into data science, data engineering, and I'd say technical and non-technical skills that you think really sort of are worth investing in?
Definitely prompt engineering. I'm joking.
Yes. I would say problem solving, and I'll let that be Joe's prompt, but problem solving is one of the number one things that's maybe not always taught in these programs.
Yeah, I think problem solving for sure. In fact, I was just speaking with in another school about this today, and we're talking about some ideas for labs, right? And one of the things I wanted to do was actually have so this will be for data engineers, right? And the things I wanted to have is something that's realistic to when you get on the job. And here's the thing, learning how to make greenfield technology and architecture probably isn't the thing you're going to be doing when you get a job. It's like maintaining systems that might break, right? So one of the things I wanted to do was have actually debugging broken systems and fixing them. That was probably might be one of the labs, but I think keeping it as realistic as possible, versus the stuff that you would idealize, here we're going to create a new system from scratch. I'm like, the number of times you actually get to do that in your job is not that often, right? Because you set it up and then now you're maintaining it. And I think Matt's absolutely right. Problem solving is a huge one. Like when things break, what's the mental checklist you go through to figure out how to solve a problem? I mean, Matt's really good at this, for example. Like he's like a heat-seeking missile on just figuring out problems. I would say I'm okay at it. He's better.
Joe's really good at it too. Actually, he doesn't give.
I'm really good at it, but I'm also really humble, and I give Matt all the accolades. But it's
Thank you,
but
Joe.
it's also an interesting one where the I think the ability to continuously learn and stay on top of things, I think, is the other skill. So problem solving and continuous learning, I think those two combined will take you a long ways. And the absence of either one is going to kneecap you pretty hard. So
I'm going to add something that won't exactly contradict you, Joe, but I'm going to point out a place where they do need the architecture stuff. And I think in many cases, they're not getting that inside of computer science. And that is we see over and over again that someone will like be really successful at a job. Maybe they're even involved in an open source project. So like in the guts of Apache Spark. And then they go start a startup and they design a new architecture. And it's absolutely horrifying because they're really good at Spark, but they're not good at like the global architecture, putting together all these different systems. And so I think there is a place for teaching engineers about architecture, even if they're not using it every day, because once in a while, they're going to have to design architectures or understand them. And they're not going to have that skill from the job necessarily, right? So if they don't learn it just like abstractly, then they'll never have that skill and then they'll make a lot of mistakes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Yeah, it's definitely it's a tension of like, what are you going to be most doing? But you're absolutely right. Yeah, I do agree with that, because you want to at least let people know things like architecture do exist, especially now that, a lot of companies, the traditional role of an architect is sort of going away. There's not, some companies, they still have a dedicated architect, but anymore that's, I think it's being democratized, for better or for worse. But it is what it is. So yeah, agreed.
This is why in our book, we have a section on choosing technologies. That's because we talk a lot in data engineering about here are cool technologies, but we don't spend enough time talking about how to choose them. And some once in a while that does come up. And then those are really, really critical decisions when they happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how do you make the choice? I mean, there's such a proliferation of tools. It sounds like there's a danger of sort of being too laser focused on one big tool like Spark or something. But also it seems impossible to keep up with the whole landscape of tools now. So, how do you strike that balance in terms of staying on top of what's important and relevant and valuable?
Whatever looks good in your resume, I think.
That's right. Resume driven development, right? Yeah. I think the number one problem I see in this domain is that there really is in tech a focus on having the coolest technology, right? Back in the big data era, it's like, whose data is the biggest? And ultimately, there are a lot of other factors that should go into those decisions. Like, how much is it going to cost to maintain this? Am I going to have my team on call over the weekend maintaining this? How sophisticated? What's the balance between sophistication and simplicity? And quite often, especially for a small startup that doesn't have a lot of resources, or even for a big company that has other priorities, you really want to lean more towards simplicity than sophistication. And in terms of keeping up to make those decisions, I think you need to read a lot, but then you just need to find a lot of people to talk to and get a lot of different contradictory opinions, and then try to refine your own opinion out of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Certainly I learn a lot from you guys all the time, especially your Monday morning data chats where you bring in a lot of the like real experts in the field. So I'd recommend folks use that as a resource for learning about the people in this, in data and sort of what they think is important and relevant. Are there other resources you'd recommend for just to like who to follow and what to pay attention to? There's a lot of noise in this space, so it can be hard to absorb all of it.
There is a lot of noise, and I would say it's finding people who have done this, the things that they're talking about. I think there's, a lot of influencers and so forth out there, myself included, probably. And, so I guess find the people that, doing something interesting that you like. But yeah, there's no shortage of noise. Vendors are also, I would say, it's an interesting one. I mean, everyone's a vendor to some extent, but just pay attention. Just understand, like, what is this person trying to get out of this content, right? Like, what's their call to action? Do they want you to buy something, or are they just trying to educate? Selflessly from the bottom of their heart. I mean, could be any combination of it, but just understand the motivation of the people who are also, providing the content.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of people who to follow, I mean, I think in the data engineering space, at least, like Ben Rogozin's good, Seattle data guy, Zach Wilson, and there's probably a bunch of other people that I'm forgetting about, but we're all friends, so yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and it is tricky right now. Like, for example, Twitter is kind of notorious for a lot of opinions built over motivations of venture capital, for example, or motivations of new startups trying to sell product, and that's fine. And I actually still think those opinions can be valuable sometimes, but you just need to find counterbalance opinions that maybe don't have skin directly in the game in the same way, that aren't directly profiting off of technologies, that can give you more objective opinions. And so, yeah, I like the list Joe gave, and maybe you can come up with some more to post in the comments when we air this. So yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Data science too. I mean, there's a lot of different avenues too. I mean, there's so many variations in content right now. It's just hard to know.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Just listen to every podcast out there and watch every video, and then you'll figure it out. But be sure to listen to our podcast.
Speed,
really
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been watching sort of the data science space. I mean, I don't know, I've sort of been in this general arena for the last 4 or 5 years. Just watching, it seems like I've seen claims that the overall sort of data science job market is down maybe 15%. Meanwhile, I'm seeing like O'Reilly, for example, say that there's an increase in on their learning platform for people searching for data engineering, like 35% year over year. So, what do you make of that? Do you feel like there's some evolution of the sort of data science, and is there a movement into data engineering? Do you see that, or am I maybe like misreading that data?
That's a good question. So there are a couple of things here. I think we have to bring this up at some point, because everyone is probably thinking about it on this discussion who's watching this. And that is, there's now the shifting, the funding has pivoted from kind of core data products, that startups that really got a lot of money after the Snowflake IPO, into generative AI. Like, that is where the money is in startups and venture capital right now. And so I think in practice, this means that if you are a data scientist, you probably want to look at pivoting into something. Either you want to pivot into maybe a more conventional corporate job, so supporting a big company that has a lot of data needs. That could be something in data engineering. Or if you want to go the startup route, then you want to hone your skills to fit into that kind of sphere of generative AI, because again, that's where the jobs are going to be over the next couple of years. And I mean, generative AI increasingly feels like more of an ops and engineering problem than maybe a conventional data science problem. It's usually, to build these large language models, for example, you're not really sitting down with a data set and pandas on your laptop as much anymore. You're like managing web scraping and repeated rounds of training and training ops. And so I don't know, potentially that's an interesting career move to look at. ML ops and data engineering are certainly closely related. They're not exactly the same. You could take some data engineering skills and sort of pivot into ML ops. Makiko Basley is a really good person to follow if you're interested in this domain. We can come up with some other names as well. I don't know. What do you think about this, Joe? But I think everyone in this space is kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with this huge explosion in generative AI. But that's just where there's so much money. It's absolutely insane right now.
Yeah, we should probably get into that.
Yeah, maybe so. We're gonna have a new startup tomorrow, generative AI. That's where we're going.
Yeah, just throw AI into everything. I don't think you're seeing things right. I think the pivot from data science into data engineering is a real secular trend. And I think for a lot of the reasons that we mentioned with recovering data scientists, right? It's like, we're not making this up to be controversial. It's just like, it's just reality, right? Like, companies, I think, jumped the gun a bit, maybe with hiring a bunch of data scientists. No offense, Matt. But I think what people are now realizing is, I think in order for data scientists to really succeed and do their job, right, you have to set them up for success. And it's a strange idea, I know. But it was also, I think, kind of spoke to the immaturity of the data field too, where it's you just don't know. There's not really a playbook. Data scientist is a new job. Of course, we'll go hire a bunch of them, right? And then you find out that, they actually need caring and feeding, and love and everything and attention, just like a newborn child. And so, but you didn't have the capability, so you got to be able to do that, and that's where data engineering comes in, and that's where we are. But yeah, I think that the thing that just kind of the sea change that's happening right now is definitely with generative AI, and I'm starting to hear hypothesizing. We'll see how this goes. I mean, I've been through a few of these cycles with ML before. I remember back in the day, people were saying that machine learning was going to take away, do away with data warehousing and BI in short order, and that didn't happen. So, but I mean, there will be, I think, some changes when it comes to large language models and its impact on analytics, for example, and the way we interface with data, that's going to happen. And the ways that we deal with unstructured data, I think, is going to be pretty awesome to see. And it's TBD. I'm not smart enough to figure out where it goes, but I think I have a pretty good idea. So,
what do you say to I saw a hopefully facetious tweet this morning, that data scientists are just going to be replaced by a ChatGPT code interpreter. Are you more worried, or are you more hopeful about what generative AI can do?
I guess a combination of the two. I think the reality is that in the near term, the actual concrete need for data scientists probably hasn't changed that much in the last 6 months. It's the buzz has changed, the venture funding situation has changed, but the actual concrete needs haven't changed much. In 2, 3, 5 years, maybe things will start to change. We'll see. I think we're still figuring out how to use this technology and what it means. I mean, there are some really exciting things going on, but we're not to the point where you can just turn a large language model loose on your data and have it run pandas for you and do all this stuff. So, but maybe Joe has different opinions. I'm curious to hear.
I mean, you say that today, but it seems like there's new advances happening.
No, it's true. I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's not you said that somebody's going to go invent that in a couple hours, and away we go. But I think I think the role is just going to change, right? So I think people who are assigned to answer questions, especially what or when type questions, very descriptive questions, I think that's going to be largely automated, and rightfully so, right? We actually wrote about that in our book for other reasons. We didn't say it was generative AI, but just the fact that real-time data shortens the feedback loop between things to the point where if you're going to do things quickly, you should just automate the action you're going to take. Why do you need to stare at a dashboard that's updating in real time? What action are you going to do with that? So it'll force people to be more domain experts, and I think get closer to working with, quote, the business. I think that's the inevitable outcome, and I think it's a good thing, really. That's the common complaint I have about data science is that it seems to sort of worship at its own kind of altar. There's a lot of ceremony involved with it, and I think it needs to be more directly tied to the business. I had an article about this last month that it was called "The Business Doesn't Care About, quote, Data." Meaning that don't come to stakeholders talking about data, not especially business stakeholders, non-technical. They don't know, they probably don't care. So, I think if you can satisfy their needs though by understanding what they want and providing, value in that way, then that's where you're going to win. So, hopefully the role just evolves to, everyone's adding a lot more impact, and by everybody I also mean humans and machines adding more impact. It's going to be definitely a hybrid role. So looking forward to it. I mean, it also might be the apocalypse. I don't know. So, but we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've heard that thread through some of the stuff you've been talking about lately, Joe. And it seems like kind of there was this big rush to be data driven, and then now it feels like data driven is sort of table stakes. Everyone sort of has, maybe not everyone, but a lot of folks have more data than they know what to do with. How do folks evolve to stay relevant and stay and make sure that they're so valuable in their companies, especially when some of the work they've been doing starts to get automated more?
That's a good question. I mean, I think going back to what Joe was saying, I think understanding business processes and developing domain expertise can make a lot of difference. Back to what you were saying, Joe, about automating things, a lot of that isn't even a technology problem. It is an organizational problem. It's convincing managers that they can automate a lot of tasks, and that actually, instead of automating themselves out of a job, they'll be more successful and in some ways have more to manage. We saw this happen with marketing, with automating ad decisions, for example, and some organizations were capable of doing this and others were not. Others, even if you had the talent, the managers just wouldn't let go of things to allow the automation to take place, and those businesses ultimately fell behind. And so I feel like if you're a data scientist, just working with the stakeholders, helping them to understand how you can help them with their jobs, that's where you're really going to be successful. And so it's kind of a combined technical teaching and leadership role within your company to actually affect organizational change.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree.
Are there things that you wish you knew, when you started in I don't know, I guess once you started in sort of data roles, or even when you moved into data engineering, that you didn't know to start, that would have been helpful?
Don't be an idiot. So I think my first boss, he was a great guy. I love him to death still. He was so my first job, I ended up working directly with the CEO of a fast growing company, and it was like I was his his numbers guy, right? So anything he needed, I would figure out for him. Any business problem he wanted solved, I would help him solve it. That was a great experience, right? But I think when I first started my job, I was it's kind of a dork. I come to him and I'm like, speaking math, speaking stats, and he's like, I have no idea what you're saying, nor do I really care. There's a quote, something he's told me was like, when I ask for the time, don't tell me how to make a watch, just tell me the time. So that stuck with me, I think. So, learn to speak the language of the business. I would say, empathize, and I would say, get your hands dirty too. Like, that's how you're going to learn things. So I think that, I had a very unique experience. I can't say that most people have that specific experience in their first job. But it was like getting an MBA probably in like a, crash course and just running a fast growing company. So very unique situation. Definitely grateful for it. So, but yeah, definitely not being an idiot, which I certainly was when I first started. I would have yelled at myself a lot. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, and I would say something very similar to what Joe just said, and also related to what I was saying about, your combined technical and leadership role as a data scientist. And that is, as a technical practitioner, whether you're a data engineer, data scientist, ML ops, whatever it is, don't get stuck in that silo. It's very easy to say, oh, I have a lot of code to write, I have projects to get done, and kind of ignore the people on the business side. And you've got to remember what your job is. And that is ultimately to make that your job is not to write SQL queries. It's not just to debug data quality issues, even though that's important. It's not just to keep systems running. It's to support the business processes. And so make sure as you're doing those other tasks that you learn how to prioritize the stuff that's actually going to help the company to be successful. So yeah, that's by actually communicating with people, not just sitting in a cubicle by yourself writing code.
I would say maybe some good lessons, especially if you're early in your careers. Watch old reruns of the Office, the UK and the US version. I always call it sort of the Michael Scott rule. So he's the manager, the kind of the buffoon, or David Brent, I suppose, if you're watching the UK version. But in either case, I think it's good to note these things, because if you can just do the opposite of what these guys do, you'll probably be really successful in your career. And so I always encourage people to maybe learn by proof by contradiction, I suppose, to use some math speak here. But that's a good time investment. So
That's good. That's good.
I'm sure we've all had bosses like that, right? So it's
yeah. That's true. That's true. I know. Yeah, that's great. I know. So I think so are there other like data roles that you feel like are kind of I don't know, that could grow in the near future? I know we've talked a lot about data science and data engineering and touched on like ML ops, and just if you've got sort of the skills and you sort of know Python, or you're good at sort of understanding data, what other avenues might there be in industry now for folks to consider?
I think governance is going to be a really big one.
Mm-hmm.
So things related to privacy, regulations, what else? Ethics, all those kinds of things. I think the governance is an overarching field, but I think that's going to become a lot more of a thing, especially with generative AI and just the implications of that on business data. So that's the word governance probably scares a lot of people, and maybe it should, but I think that's going to be a growing field coming up. I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
So I'm going to cross over on roles slightly and talk about security ops. And there's a very strong tendency in corporate America to treat security as kind of a passive thing. So in other words, you come up with a set of rules that everyone's supposed to comply with. You go around and make sure everyone's complying with the rules. You check boxes. And I think we're seeing increasingly that in as the world has become more connected, it's been very connected for at least 20 years. This approach to security just doesn't work very well. And in the data roles, there's a tendency to say that security is like kind of over there. It's someone else's. That's the security team's problem. But I think increasingly as data privacy, data security becomes a central issue, we need to think of this probably as a data role more than anything else. And it needs to be like an operational active role instead of just thinking about compliance and checking boxes. It needs to be creative. We need to think about how people are going to defeat our security or what our organizational and human weaknesses are and be very proactive in counteracting those threats. And I think as we've seen, data leaks that have happened over the last decade and huge privacy breaches, I think this is only going to become more important in the future. And if you're in data, you can, and you have some understanding of how the internet works, then you can get into this role, frankly, I think. So Joe has opinions too. I triggered him.
Well, I also think that the role, it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I feel like software engineering and data is going to sort of merge, especially with the notion of data products. So I'm very curious to see where that goes to. We write about this also in the last chapter of the book because titles change a lot in tech often, and so what we call data engineer today might be something different tomorrow. But I think the feedback loop between data and apps is just going to shrink to the point where it's almost, includes machine learning too. So, yeah. What sort of the role of a data scientist, I think, will be very interesting to see, right? Because it's already ambiguous. And so what does it support at the end of the day? Like what function? I'm very curious about that. I don't have an answer, but I know it's going to change a lot. So
yeah, that's sort of my theory about why it's we see maybe fewer folks calling themselves data scientists, that it kind of started very ambiguous, and then as we've sort of figured out what those skills are, they've sort of merged into other roles. It's sort of democratized across different data practitioner roles. But it seems to be evolving kind of as we speak.
Well, yeah, and when DJ Patil came up with the term, and whoever else was with him back in the day at LinkedIn, I don't think they had a definition for data science, because I read this interview with him a few years ago where he talked about data scientist, and he said he actually intentionally didn't define it. And so, but it's funny because it's a term we all use, right? But there isn't really a set definition on it.
I think that's totally true. I recall at O'Reilly we had this short report called "What is Data Science?" I think "What is Data Science?" And for 12 years or something, it was like one of the most popular reports we had. It just like stayed relevant because people were always asking that same question.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It is. I think the other thing to be aware of here is that all of these titles, like data engineer, ML ops, or whatever, there are actually many different types of sub roles within those roles. And so that's something worth exploring. Like there are many, many different types of data engineering and many different focuses. And so I think the best way to gain information about that is just to go talk to people who are doing these different jobs in places.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of shifting a little bit to talk about your book, which has been really popular. I'm sure you guys get a lot of folks wanting to talk to you and get your signature on their books, etc. So I'm glad to hear it's been so successful. Like, what have you learned in that process?
Thanks for making it happen. Thanks for making it happen.
Thanks for taking a chance on us.
Like, what have you learned from that process? I mean, both sort of maybe. I believe that I think writing a book is a big learning process. You're never going to like start a book knowing exactly what it's going to contain and what you're going to sort of discover. So I'm curious sort of about the process for you and what you discovered as you wrote it.
Definitely that part. I mean, I think we were aware that writing a book was a lot about collecting knowledge that exists and presenting it in a way that people can learn from. But we definitely became even more aware that was the case as we were writing the book. Like, yeah, this is a huge topic. And really our role here is to like obviously express some of our own knowledge, but more to learn from people who are working in this domain and kind of create a synthesis of all these different roles that we call data engineers, so that someone coming into the field can understand what's going on, or someone who wants more of an overview, who works in one corner of the field can understand what the whole field consists of.
Yeah, and I think our true north is always what's not going to change or what's unlikely to change. So just keeping that as one of your focuses it's hard to do, right? Because I think it's easy to get caught up in the turbulence of the present, and there's no shortage of things, especially in the 2020, 2021, 2022, where it was like lots of companies, lots of ideas, right? COVID's happening, and it's just a whirlwind. But that was I think a good approach, taking true north. Research was nice. Podcasts were helpful for that. We got to make a lot of good friends, and our acknowledgement section is huge because I think we're inspired by a lot of people, and I think that was really cool to do. But the trip for us was, I think, several months before the book was supposed to come out. Hey, what's up? There's the book.
Signed.
Several months before it was supposed to come out, it was already the number one pre-release on Amazon in several categories. And I think that messes with your head because you're still trying to get this book done, but you're just like, cool, now it has to be like really, really good. So not that we would make a crappy book, but I mean, that just the amount of pressure I think on us at that time was I think a bit more than what probably other authors had to go through, because while I feel fly under the radar, we were had a lot of visibility on this project, for better or for worse. I think it forced us to take it very seriously. And I even told Matt, like, if we have to, with our business that we were also running at the same time, if we had to, pick one, I said we prioritize the book. Because if we can do that and it's successful, then things happen. If the book bombs, then we just wasted a year and a half of our life, and for what, right? For a lot of stress. So it was like, we have to take this seriously. And, but at the end of the day, the thing is, it's the market that really decides the fate of your book, not, you can make the best book in the world, but if people don't like it or don't know about it, then what does it matter? So that was the other part of it, is just making sure that, we wrote a book that, hopefully people would like. And I guess most people do. So that's cool.
It does seem that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that you two are sort of opposites. How did that play out in your writing process?
Matt, you want to take
I
that one?
mean, I think we both wrote in our own styles, and then we ended up editing each other's work a lot and going through a lot of back loops. And I think that's how we made it work. And so we were able to like come up with a unified voice. We divided writing different sections, but then we would end up exchanging sections and do significant rewriting and giving a lot of feedback. And I think a lot of what makes the book work is having this voice that's not too academic, but also has like a very measured, there is some theory there, right? Like we do think about theoretical questions because that's a lot of what this is meant to do, but it also is like very straightforward and conversational. And so, yeah, that couldn't have happened with either one of us alone, from my perspective.
No, it couldn't. And yeah, our writing styles are totally different. I mean, Matt and I don't think you could pick more opposite types of people who happen to be best friends. Like it's a pretty funny relationship. The
odd couple, to cite a very old reference, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah, odd couple for sure. But it worked, right? So I mean, I the way I write, I tend to be very plan it out by the week. Here's what we're going to be writing. This day I'm writing this day I'm writing that. I think Matt, he had other things on his mind. And so he would take the time just to, on the weekends, sit down and just hammer it out. And I think the first few iterations of it, I think it was scary for both of us, because we're like, okay, how's this going to work? But I think we figured it out, obviously. And, and so, but again, a book like that, I don't think either of us wouldn't have written that book, and the thing is, we're both working on new projects right now, right? And so I'm very curious to see kind of how these shape up. I mean, the way I write is, very conversational, very, I guess succinct. So, Matt writes differently, and so yeah.
Yeah, tell us more about what you're working on next.
Yeah, a book on data modeling. But it's not the book you think it is, right? So everyone thinks it's going to be like, a new approach to analytical data modeling or something. But I'm taking the approach that data has a life cycle. And so just, data kind of flows like water. And so how does it change based upon different needs, right? And different stages of where it flows, right? I think that's something that needs to be discussed. And also the notion is, if you can get the data modeled correctly upstream when it starts, everything else works from there. And if you can't, then obviously, everyone else has problems. So it's a bit of what I'm working on. How about you, Matt? What are you
So
working
I'm
on these
actually going
days?
to loop back to some of the things we learned in writing the book. And I think one question that writing the book brought up is like, how is media and learning going to continue to evolve? It's a funny thing, like all the way back in the 90s, I think back then, Joe, you got involved in using the internet pretty early on. And I was a big nerd back then. So I was always reading about computers and such. And there was this whole discussion of like hypermedia and how links, between media were going to change how we learn and how we experience information. And now you fast forward to 2022, 2023, a lot of our media consumption hasn't actually changed that much since the 80s and 90s. And the question is, how do we think about new ways of presenting information? So for example, the video explosion, how do we use that to enhance people's learning as opposed to just creating more distractions on TikTok or something, more like side entertainment? And I think some of my projects, I'm trying to think about these same questions too. Like, if you have ideas that you want people to learn from, what's the best way to present those? What's the right compromise between sort of the gravity of a book versus, throwaway, just quick tweet that someone throws out there? And I think there's something in between where content can be very dynamic, but it's still something that people can learn from in the process of developing their careers, making business decisions, learning new technologies, and so on. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. I'm very focused on the moment on organizational questions around how we invest in data, how we scale data. I think there's been a lot of yelling about this from 2020 to 2023. Like, are we wasting too much money on data? Is the cloud too expensive? How should enterprise companies be thinking about IT problems? And so, yeah, you'll see more coming out from me on those topics soon, hopefully in some new media ways that may also lead to a book. I will probably eventually lead to another book down the line.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think we'll stop writing books. I think it's more of the question for me, and you're probably going to hate me for saying this, but like, I've been thinking like what is the nature of a book in 2023, right? Like, what is its purpose? And so, I mean, I have a lot of books, as you can see, and a lot more on my Kindle. And but as Matt points out, it's what are other experiences people can have, with the information and the story you're trying to tell. And so that's something I think that's been in our mind a lot, as well as the I think the notion too, it's about, writing a book is one thing, but building the audience around the ideas, right? That's another important piece there that I think is, if you approach it from a book only standpoint, I think people tend to forget that. I think that's one reason that we were successful with our book is we built the audience around the idea, and then, the audience came along for the ride, and the audience grew and so forth. But
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare to have the two skills in one. I think a lot of folks they're good writers and maybe introverted and maybe, aren't really comfortable like selling themselves as authors and sort of talking up, their accomplishments and their work. And, and I think you guys strike a really good balance without coming across as like egotistical, but, really acknowledging that like you put in a lot of work and a lot of people need the information. So it's like really just about how people get the information they need, right?
Well, now that we're all nerd famous, I mean, Matt's like a total hype beast right now, and just kidding. So, but
No, but I mean,
it is a balance. What was that?
It is. Oh, and I was just going to say, I love this idea of community tied with content, right? And Joe has done a fantastic job of that. We both worked together on the Monday morning data chat. Anaconda has a really, really great community with a lot of people engaged. On the other hand, it's funny that we've even seen what I would call community fraud, right? Like, community became so important for raising venture capital. We had the series of scandals where people were like paying for GitHub stars and paying, there was fake Slack channel membership and other things like this. But certainly I want to focus on like authentic community and how that can feed into learning experiences. And I think Joe is really a leader in that space, I would say.
Well, yeah, it wasn't like a plan this, right? It's like it was my grand plan to be an influencer or a thought leader. It just sort of happens, right? But it is what happens. So you just have to take the role, and the role chooses you sometimes too. But I think at this point, it's up to people like Matt, me, and other people in that position to really force the change, and maybe be in a position to change the industry too. I think we're at that spot where that's a possibility, right? So,
Yeah.
you know,
I don't think it's
interesting. I mean,
accidental. I think that there's a reason why, you're able to build such a big network and get a lot of engagement is that, you're really helping people. Like it's really, people just need the guidance and you guys have seen a lot, from kind of all sides. So, I think being able to answer questions and I think you have a really open chat so that folks can answer questions and you do respond to them. So I think that is really engaging content when people feel like they can be part of the discussion.
well, yeah, you have to pay it forward a lot. I hate using that term, but it's like you have to, put yourself out there, and if people like what you're into and they vibe with it, then they'll go along, right? And so, but it just takes time. I think a lot of people want to try and short circuit the creation process and the community building, and it's impossible to do. Like, you just got to put in the time. And then weird things happen, right? Like I was at a club in Berlin recently and somebody recognized me there and was like, "Hey, you're that one dude." And I'm like, yeah, I know. How's it going? So, so I mean, that happens, right? And that's not the first time that's happened. So, but yeah, so that kind of stuff will trip you out for sure. But it's just, I don't know. It is what it is. So,
Matt, how do you handle being nerd famous now?
I'm not very good at being nerd famous at all. It's I'm having to learn to get used to it. So that's all I'll say about it.
Okay.
well, you don't walk around with your own T-shirts and like a bunch of gold chains.
Well, I mean, I have my face on a T-shirt that I wear around New York City. So yeah.
Yeah,
actually, my friend Ken G, he has his own T-shirts. It's kind of funny. He always hands them out to people, so I'll wear them. But
nice.
Yeah,
Kenji's
it's recognized too. It's funny. Well, yeah, we were at a restaurant in Salt Lake City, and
he got recognized.
After we were leaving, but he got mobbed. Yeah, it was kind of funny. So,
that's great.
Yeah, it happens. So
he's so down to earth. That's the funny thing. He's very down to earth about it. So yeah, aside from the T-shirts.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end of the hour here. How do people learn more about what you're up to? Where can they follow you and learn more about your upcoming projects and things like that?
I'll have a Substack that I'll be saying more about fairly soon. So probably actually announce that on LinkedIn or something along those lines when I have some articles to share. So, and then of course the Monday morning data chat, you're welcome to tune in there, and we tend to announce stuff we're doing there.
You're also on LinkedIn.
And I'm on LinkedIn. Yes.
He's on LinkedIn. Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn too. So you can get me, add me there. See Joe Reese at substack.com. I have the Joe Reese podcast as well, Joe Reese Show, and then obviously Monday Morning Data Chat. Yeah, that's about it. And you can find me, I don't know, all over the planet, usually giving talks or something like that. So find me at nightclubs, I guess.
Well, in Berlin,
so,
now we'll keep an eye out for you.
Yeah. So hope maybe I'll just go live there. No, but I mean, we're pretty easy to find. I mean, quick Google search, you can find Matt or me pretty easy. We're not hidden, and we're not total misanthropes. So yeah, we're around.
Go get the book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering.
Book.
It's very long, but there's lots of good tidbits in there.
I know. I remember I handed it to Bill Inman, and the first thing he said was, "Don't ever write a book this long again." He just like throws it back at me. I'm like, "That's good to see you too, Bill."
And Jess, you were nervous about the length as well, right? When you were helping to develop this, when you were acquiring it.
Well, unfortunately, I left before the final decisions were made. Otherwise, I might have had more to say. But it is printed and it is real and it's selling very well, so it doesn't really matter at this point.
And if you want to help us out, leave reviews on platforms like Amazon.com or O'Reilly.
Yeah, smash the like button. Give us a 5-star review for sure. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. I have some announcements for folks. If they want to continue to take part in events that we have coming up, we have quite a few. May 23rd, you can join us for a data science portfolio workshop and get insight into launching your data science career. On June 6th, you can attend generative AI and large language models in action to discover the power of LLMs and Gen AI models. On June 13th, you can attend a free course, Build and Deploy Data Apps in Anaconda Anaconda notebooks and learn best practices from the holoviz and panel teams at Anaconda, and also take part in our upcoming contest with cash prizes, which will be very exciting. And then on June 28th, join us for a free webinar on the PyScript ecosystem, the magic of Python in the browser, with Anaconda developer advocate Valerio Maggio. And you can register for all of these events at anaconda.cloud. You can get started on our on-demand courses at Anaconda Learning as well. So new subscribers can use code Get Started at checkout to activate your 30-day free trial. You can take these courses, track your progress, and earn completion badges. And we're going to have a lot more live events and courses coming soon, certifications coming soon as well. So we're really excited about, so keep an eye there. So want to thank you, Joe and Matt, so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure connecting with you again. And, you know, I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
All right. Have a good one, guys.
Have a good
All right, see
weekend.
ya. Take
Bye
care.
now.